My name is William. I am going to tell you a story that turned my life upside down, something that has never left me and still haunts my dreams at night. This is a story of a curse, a punishment, and a fight with dark forces. It's a secret I've tried to hide from myself, but now it's time to share it. After turning 19, I left my family home and built my own life, my own name. I was so focused on my work that I forgot I even had a family. Honestly, our bond was never that strong anyway. I hadn't even called my mother in years. So, I can't really say we had a relationship. I never thought about going back to that house. But you never know what life has in store for you. One day, without understanding how it happened, I lost everything. I didn't even have enough money for a bus ticket. After days of hitchhiking, I decided, reluctantly, to return to my mother's house. The truth was, I had no other place to go. Finally, after several days, I arrived. My mother's house, the old mansion where I spent my childhood, looked completely different now. Its roof was covered in moss, and the garden was overrun with wild weeds. The house felt like something that didn't belong, dark and threatening. It reminded me of the difficult years of my childhood. I wanted to leave, but where could I go? I knocked on the door, and knocked, but there was no answer. I could hear something moving inside, but neither my mother nor anyone else came out. I knocked intermittently for 15 to 20 minutes, but still no one answered. I tried climbing over the garden wall, but whenever I tried to climb, an invisible force pushed me down. The walls were wet and slippery, and there was nothing firm to hold on to. I didn't remember these walls being so high when I was a child. They had never seemed this huge before. I struggled for hours, but I couldn't get over it and my anxiety grew. Then I thought, why not call the police? If someone was inside, they could help. I told the police about the situation, and they took it seriously enough to accompany me. I guided them while they followed the directions. But when we arrived at the street where the house was supposed to be, there was no house. The officers first looked at me, then at each other. They seemed to wonder if I was sane. Then they asked me to give them the address again. They put it into the GPS, and it confirmed there was no house there. This couldn't be true, I thought. I had just been there an hour ago. My mom was there. I tried to convince them, but the house wasn't there. They left, leaving me behind. I collapsed on the ground, struggling not to cry and not lose my mind. I watched them leave, then turned around. And there it was, the house, standing right in front of me. It had reappeared. It had been there the whole time. I couldn't believe it, and I remembered the woman who had worked with my mother years ago. I decided to go to her. Maybe she could help, or at least give me more information. She had been working for my mother, so she might have the key or know what was going on. I knocked on her door. She seemed surprised but invited me in and offered me tea. I explained the situation, saying, I knocked on my mom's door, but no one answered. I didn't think it would be wise to tell the police everything. To be honest, I didn't want them to think I was crazy. You worked for my mom. You must have a key, right? Her face suddenly froze. I never worked for your mother, William, she said. After your father passed away, she fired us all. She locked herself in that house. She doesn't go out, doesn't eat or drink. We don't even know if she's alive or not. All I know is that we couldn't get in if we tried. No, I said, she can't be like that. Her eyes fell to the floor, as if she were carrying a heavy burden. She struggled to speak. William, she said, her voice trembling, I don't know how to tell you this. What's going on? I asked. Please, if you know something, tell me. She began to speak through tears. There was never peace between your parents. Your father tortured your mother. She couldn't take it anymore. One day, she poisoned his food. That night, your father died in his room. Her words echoed in my mind. No, that's impossible, I said, but fear began to take over me. She continued, your mother didn't bury him in the family cemetery. She buried him in the garden. What happened to him after that? I don't know. How do you know all this? I asked. It's just a rumor, she replied. Ridiculous, I muttered, rushing out of the house. I couldn't believe it. Had my mother really killed my father? I pushed the thought from my mind, though the fear grew stronger. I walked to the house again. The idea that she might be right didn't seem plausible. But what if she was? I shook the thought off, but it wouldn't leave me. I couldn't enter the house for several more days. Every time I looked through the window, I saw eyes staring back at me. But whenever I focused on those eyes, they disappeared. I decided to go to the center of town and try to find some answers. Then, a man approached me. "You need help," he said. I had never seen him before. "Take me to that house," he said. I don't know why, but I didn't hesitate to show him the way. The man carried a small, handwritten book in his hand. He was mumbling something, but I couldn't hear it. We arrived at my mother's house, and when he saw the door, he stopped and stared at it for a long time. "This house is not just your mother's," he said. "There's something darker inside." We knocked on the door, and the woman who answered looked exactly like the one I had thought had worked with my mother, but her face, filled with anger, and her eyes, glowing with something unnatural, made it clear she wasn't human. "Leave," she screamed. "He wants to speak with your mother," I said. The woman grinned mockingly. "Her punishment isn't over yet," she said. As she tried to shut the door, the man raised the book and held it toward her. When the book appeared, the woman took a step back. But almost immediately, her form began to shift into something monstrous as she charged at us. She opened the book and began reading aloud. The creature screamed and shifted into a shadow, attempting to scare us. It descended upon us like a dark mist, but it couldn't get past the circle the man had drawn with white powder on the ground. The woman walked around the circle, trying to threaten us with her monstrous shape, but it couldn't enter. The man put the book on the ground and began reciting prayers. The creature turned into a giant predator bird, then a massive snake, but it could never enter the circle. Finally, the man whispered one word, and the creature screamed as it burned in flames and vanished. The atmosphere grew quiet, and the creature was gone. We quickly entered the house. Inside, we were hit with a horrible smell. Decaying flesh, death, and mold mixed together. We found my mother in the corner of the house, her body small and frail, her hair completely white. Her eyes were vacant as she stared at the wall. But when she saw me, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Mom, I'm here," I said, touching her. At that moment, she understood that the suffering was finally over. My mother was taken to the hospital, where she received physical treatment. My father's body was exhumed, and an investigation began. The rumors were true. My mother had poisoned him. Since then, nothing has been the same. My mother and I still undergo therapy. I haven't been able to stop the creatures from appearing in my dreams. Maybe this story isn't really the end, but one thing is certain: darkness is never far away.